We thought about leaving it out the step, the whole service, but John's too tall. Good Sunday morning. It's a privilege to share this pulpit this morning with Angela and John and Beth and all of you. I have preached here at First Unitarian Church in years past, actually a couple of times, but I was always a stranger coming in from afar. And this time is very, very different. I live and work and worship among you now, and it makes all the difference. I'm also a first service person. So my new friends are here. Unitarian Universalist congregations promise to encourage one another in the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. It's embodied in our fourth principle. We frequently speak of seeking truth as if it were an objective and replicable part of reality. And I am confident that we enjoy many overlapping, mutually affirming truths among us today. It is Sunday, June 24th. It's another beautiful day in Albuquerque. All are welcome here, today and every day. But friends, these are not the truths that need a free and responsible search. The truths we need in order to sustain our lives on this majestic and amazing planet are often subjective, usually provisional, and more about meaning than any particular factual reality. The truths we seek are the ones we need in order to bring our best selves to this wild and precious life, and to encourage others to do the same. Often these truths are about ourselves and our relationships, our self-understanding, and our sense of urgency and agency in the world. Who loves me? Do they really? Why? Who respects me? Really? Why? Why do I feel this way right now? Why do I keep making the same kind of mistake over and over? It looks a little different, but when you dig down, it's the same thing again. What do I want? What do I need? Where do I fit? The answers to these deeper questions inform personality and identity. The answers are usually grounded in the private stories that continue to shape our lives in memorable ways. Salman Rushdie wrote, "Those who do not have power over the story that dominates their lives, the power to retell it, rethink it, deconstruct it, joke about it, and change it as times change, truly are powerless, because they cannot think a new thought." Rushdie makes it sound like it might be easy to seize this power and reframe the fundamental stories of one's life and identity. It is not a simple task to wrestle one's own past into a new shape, a new understanding, a new narrative. It is the work of personal reinvention. It is profound and important work, and it's neither quick nor easy. But why would it be? These are the stories that have shaped the most fundamental assumptions of our lives. Are we lovable, worthy, smart, acceptable? And yet without the discipline to reimagine the core stories shaping our lives, we are not open to new perspective, new experience, new truth trying to break through to new life. Many of the stories that inform our personal assumptions and shape our lives occurred when we were actually very young, younger than 12, the research says. For me, that was one of the shaping stories, was when the fourth grade teacher made it clear that I was not artistic, or when the music teacher told my brother just to move his lips. We also treat these stories as funny, but I don't paint and he doesn't sing. Were these teachers right at some important level? Or have we never tested their quick and biting assessment of childhood talent? Often we think that our initial understanding of an event is the most authentic or accurate, the one closest to the truth because it was closest to the event. It's true that these teachers said those things. It's true that we as children believed these things. After that, I'm not sure there's any truth in them at all. I say to you, friends, meaningful truth is a complex thing and one we do not perceive fully or quickly, and hardly ever in the 4th grade. The life-shaping events of our lives take time to understand. We must revisit them with a willingness to revise our understandings. Most of our important stories will need several new frames before the compelling or lasting import can be discerned. It is worth noticing whether your frame around an important story might get bigger or smaller. Have you been diminishing the most important stories of your life? Or have you made a single message far, far too important? Is there a theme, a story or event that you know has shaped your life? Is there a pattern you follow over and over again, even when you profess to want something different? Is there a devastating failure from which you have not recovered your balance and confidence? Is there a profound heartbreak that has not released you to new life and to new love? Are you denying some essential part of your identity in order to fit in? There was a voice, deep and small, in my childhood. I grew up in an alcoholic family, and in my childhood we kept really big secrets about my father's drinking. We didn't do things that we knew might upset him. We didn't invite friends over if he was home, because they would not understand how careful we needed to be. We lived in a small and anxious story. It was what social scientists now call a closed system. As a teenager, this way of living embarrassed me and made me very angry, which was not a wise thing to be with an alcoholic father. When I was in college, my father disowned me for a year, bizarrely, thinking that that would bring me home and straighten out my liberal thinking. It did not work. However, during that time, my grandmother, his mother, told me some of my father's formative story. And as a woman in her early 20s with this new information, I began to understand his demons, and the story got much more complex. There were events and nuances I hadn't known and couldn't have understood as a child. As I grew up and older, I could bring a bit more compassion, and I could set my own boundaries with my father. If he drank, I left, and of course my children left with me. My daughters only knew a loving grandfather as they grew up, and he did love them. That was always true, one of those deep, meaningful truths. They knew of his drinking only through my stories and my boundaries. It seems I had considerably more power in that relationship than I would have guessed. Now, despite that neat paragraph of summary, I would guess that I have framed and reframed the hurt anger, threats, and disillusionment of my relationship with my father hundreds of times in large and small ways. Sometimes I had the help of a gifted therapist. Sometimes it was a sensitive partner. Often it was my siblings or even my daughters who asked a question I had never considered or told a story I had never heard. The story gets bigger and better with each new insight. It doesn't get nicer and it doesn't get happier, but it does become more whole, more understandable, and frankly, more tragic than personal. And that is better. I found a greater truth, one that allowed me to recognize his virtues. He did not disappear from his family, going to bars or staying away from home, though sometimes we might have wished that. We never had to go find him or rescue him from a bad situation. He did not have car accidents. He actually seldom missed an event at school or a sports game. He worked conscientiously and carefully, saving so that he could help 4 kids with college costs. He was the unconditional lover of my parents. Often confused by our tears and our needs, but steadfastly he was present. It is very confusing to a child of any age, I would suggest, when the person with the biggest problem and the most erratic behavior is also offering the unconditional love and acceptance that all of us need. That realization doesn't erase ugly events, but it invites a certain proportionality. It makes room for the contradictions in my father's life. It begins to honor the significance of our relationship over the influences of his disease. It allowed me to let go of some of the most painful memories. I have not forgotten them, but they no longer dominate who I am and how I move in the world. With each letting go of hurt, anger, disappointment, fear, disillusionment, frustration, letting go of the missed opportunities, all of those what ifs and if onlys. With each letting go of the deep hurt of a 10-year-old, 16-year-old, 20-year-old, the story fills out. At some point, I could see a complex, deeply wounded and loving man who had handled his own anxiety, disappointment, and fear exactly as he had been carefully taught by his father and his grandfather, with a drink or 2 or 10. With each new understanding of my father, I understand myself better. Alcoholic behavior aside, I'm rather more like him than I would have admitted 40 years ago. I am a devoted parent, a conscientious professional, yes, a little bit anxious sometimes, a social liberal and a fiscal conservative. I like to fix things, so did he. I love to be outside, so did he. Before he died, we saw one another clearly and loved one another in all our wounded imperfection. I urge you to think of this work of retelling, rethinking, deconstructing, joking, and changing the formative story of your life in order to find deeper truth, because I want you to be happy and fulfilled in this one precious life we know of. It is also true that understanding your own life story requires some level of acceptance of the contradictions and the paradoxes that will not be reconciled. For me, it was the reality of a man who caused most of the pain and confusion in my young life, also being the only person who has loved me unconditionally since the day of my birth. The whole story requires both truths. Learning to live creatively with our own paradoxes is to recognize at a fundamental level that everyone copes with their wounds and their insecurities with whatever strategies they have been taught or have seen modeled. There are no authentic separations between any of us, only the groups or tribes we construct in order to allay our fears. Centered in a secure identity, I wonder, can we develop the social courage to cross those tribal lines or those party lines with an abundance of compassion and a holy curiosity? Can we learn to nurture relationships across the chasms of our polarized society by listening and telling our stories? Could we do this? Is your life diminished by a depleted story, a story that has too little power or too little love? Are you denying that voice, still and small, that wants you to heal? If you are, please know that I believe your story, and beloved, it is not the only truth. It is not the whole truth. There is another truth to balance the painful one you have taken into your heart. Only you can discover that other truth, that larger truth, that additional perspective that has escaped your notice thus far. Unitarian Universalism offers you a religious community within which to expand your self-awareness, increase your emotional maturity, and deepen your spiritual understanding. This is our religious way, to work with our own histories to better understand ourselves, to find additional truths in the stories we tell, to acknowledge the lessons of our inescapable suffering in order to break open new, engaged, and resilient futures within this beloved community. As your religious community, we will companion you in discovery and in reinterpretation. Even with an ugly story, you are beautiful to us. Tell your story within a compassionate circle and hear yourself grow stronger and clearer simply by forming the words. We will welcome your new, more whole, more authentic self. We will love you as you become, even as we love you now. This capacity to excavate and expand truth is a freedom directly connected to our Unitarian Universalist sense of human agency. We offer you this personal freedom within the beloved community so that you can tell, retell, frame, and reframe your own story until it makes you whole and brings you life. Then you can encourage others to find their complex and conflicting stories, their truths that are bigger and better. This is how we build community, respecting and exploring our independent and unique stories as we discover where they coincide and align. You have choices, my friends. Live in the bigger story. Find opportunities in those contradictions. Claim the abundant and redemptive possibility. It will make all the difference. Our closing hymn this morning is number 354 in your gray hymnal. We laugh, we cry. We do both, don't we? We laugh, we cry. Please rise in body and spirit as